wanna express this from a place of sincerity to myself. I want to be a kinder, gentler person. I want to be a stronger person. For literal years now, I've been wanting to be reborn as someone else, to be honest. I like to daydream and visualize the true self of me who is genuinely kind, relentlessly hardworking and not dominated by his fears. The me who has nothing but his highest noble pursuits in his heart and mind. And yet at 24, I'm still not that person. The words of Thorfinn, I want to be a kinder, gentler person. I want to be a stronger person. That quote made Vinland Saga one of my favorite stories to ever follow. I didn't even enjoy the first season that much, to be honest, so the tonal shift in the story since the Farmland Saga arc had me completely shook. This drastic need and sense of self-transformation of Thorfinn's whole being and soul. To go from a Genghis Khan-esque Viking warrior who killed so many people with no remorse whatsoever to transform into the most pacifistic peace, love and positivity good person guy of all time. I definitely tend to get way too easily manipulated by what I consume, but it really is a character crafted so wonderfully that it really makes you want to be a better person. So the more I've explored the story, the more it got me really intrigued. Who is behind this? Who is the man manipulating me into becoming a better human? And it all led me to a man named Makoto Yukimura. Between fighting violence with violence and spending time to heal, if I had to choose what to write, it would be about the path of healing and forgiveness. In early 2005, a mangaka by the name of Makoto Yukimura presented his brand new manga to an editor. It was about a slave in the Viking Age who eventually becomes an explorer searching for a new land. That was basically the whole pitch. However, this alone wasn't enough, according to the editor at least. So a whole barbaric Viking concept was added and Yukimura thought it would make the story more exciting, so he agreed. And then in 2005, Vinland Saga was officially released. But still, Yukimura was mostly excited about crafting a story about a slave exploring new land. It's interesting to note that he was drawn to the Norse and Viking culture due to his fascination with the historical context and themes of exploration and violence. In interviews, Yukimura has shared that he wanted to explore how violence impacts society. But we should not forget that the real heart of the story is still about growth and change, about the journey from violence to peace and the challenges born from it. Understanding and cultivating humanity in oneself and in the process transforming into a kind-hearted, strong person. Thorfinn goes exactly through that. To properly explore his transformation from a warrior to a pacifist, I want to quickly recap his journey, and because why not? A 6-year-old Thorfinn lives in Iceland with his father Thors, an ex-warrior who chose the peaceful dopamine detox lifestyle instead of war and stuff. Then his father Thors gets killed by a mercenary named Ashalat during an ambush. Thorfinn, who witnesses his father's death, swears vengeance to Ashalat, setting the stage for his ultimate Sigma transformation. But he never manages to defeat Ashalat, leading to frustration and anger. His obsession with revenge blinds him to the greater consequences of his actions. Ashalat is then killed by Ladyboy Prince Canute, stealing Thorfinn of his chance for vengeance, which leaves him completely empty. Thorfinn gets sold into slavery and ends up working on a farm. By this point, he gradually rejects violence and begins to seek redemption, ending his ultimate Sigma phase. Later, the farm gets attacked and Thorfinn turns into Mahatma Gandhi because he has no enemies and stuff. He finds his life purpose in creating a new world without war or slavery. Like I said before, Yukimura initially wanted his manga to be about a slave in the Viking Age, who eventually becomes an explorer searching for a new land. So what's kinda interesting is that Thorfinn is inspired by an actual real explorer who lived in the Viking Ages. His name? Thorfinn Karlsefni. Around 980 AD, in Iceland, a boy named Thorfinn was born. He was given the nickname Karlsefni, meaning promising boy in Old Norse language. Thorfinn came from a respected family of landowners and chieftains, which gave him a strong social standing. According to the Vinland sagas, which were Icelandic medieval texts about the Norse exploration of North America around 1000 AD, Thorfinn was an explorer and trader who led an expedition to North America in order to establish a permanent settlement there. And yes, there are actual Vinland sagas. They consist of the sagas of the Greenlanders, in which stories of Norse expeditions to Vinland are being told, focusing on a certain Leif Erikson who is credited with discovering Vinland. Then there's the saga of Erik the Red, in which voyages to the land of Vinland are being described, as well as personal conflicts Thorfinn faced during his journey. Inspired by the stories about a vast, rich and fertile land named Vinland, Thorfinn decided to set sail and make his way over there. So around 1004 AD, Thorfinn set sail with 3 ships and about 130 people, including his wife Gudrid, in hopes of founding a permanent settlement. First, he traveled to Greenland to gather resources, as it has already been settled by the Norse. Upon crossing the North Atlantic Ocean, they have arrived on the very first North American land, named Helluland, which is believed to be modern-day Baffin Island in Canada. And after briefly exploring Helluland, Thorfinn's expedition reached Markland, which is likely to be modern-day Labrador, also Canada. Markland was a wooded, resource-rich land, but still not suitable for long-term settlement. Therefore, traveling further south along the coast of Canada, they have finally reached their destination, Vinland. Vinland was very attractive to the Norse. It had fertile ground, lush meadows and wild berries. It's believed to be located in the northeastern coast of Canada, on what is now called Newfoundland. It's most widely accepted that Vinland's location was the Lonesome Meadow, which is the northern cape of Newfoundland. So yeah, it turns out Vinland is an actual real place you can visit, which is kinda crazy. Anyway, Thorfinn and his people finally got to build their settlement, exploring the land, gathering resources and trading. However, they were not alone on this newfound land. They soon encountered indigenous people who they named Skraelings. Thorfinn's approach towards the Skraelings was very diplomatic and peaceful, leading to the Norse trading their dairy milk, clothes and so on for the Skraelings' furs and pelts. The peace, however, was not permanent. At one incident, one of the Norse animals they've brought with them fled their settlement and ran towards the Skraelings, scaring them as they were unfamiliar with large animals, I guess. Consequently, the Skraelings were more cautious, yet they still agreed to keep trading with Thorfinn and his people. And then this situation got even worse. After another trade, some misunderstanding happened and the Norse ended up killing one of the Skraelings. And of course, an all-out war was the consequential result. The Skraelings soon attacked the Norse settlement, repeatedly. So it came to the point where Thorfinn decided to leave his hopes for a permanent settlement, and he abandoned Vinland. Thorfinn Karlsefni spent the rest of his life in Iceland as a respected farmer. That was the story of the real person Yukimura based his character on. In interviews, Yukimura mentioned that Vinland Saga is indeed inspired by real events, so learning what happened to the real Thorfinn could be a real indication to what might happen to him in the final saga of the manga. However, Yukimura's own story is more about the exploration of human nature than it is about settlement. While the real Thorfinn saw Vinland as a place of settlement and resources, Yukimura's Thorfinn sees Vinland as a potential land of peace and hope for a new world, where humans have no enemies. As a matter of fact, the quote "I have no enemies" is everything that I wanted to say through the story of Vinland Saga, summarized into one phrase. When the "I have no enemies" meme went viral, Yukimura wasn't even aware of the significant impact it had outside of Japan. Every time he'd see someone changing their profile name to something like "I have no enemies," it would make him happy, as this phrase reflects what he called a stubborn attitude. The stubborn attitude to reject hatred, even when justified. He also intended this message to challenge the typical narratives of vengeance in many stories, particularly in shonen and seinen mangas, by focusing on the idea that embracing peace and understanding can lead to a more meaningful and fulfilling life. He hoped that this attitude of "I have no enemies" would resonate with readers and inspire them to rethink their own perceptions of their own conflict and hostility towards other people or things. In Thorfinn's case, his philosophy began once he was completely stripped away from his previous life's purpose, which consisted of pure vengeance and violence. He felt empty. So basically, he had a post-nut clarity type of self-examination and many self-doubts for his way of living. He was on a search for meaning for his life, which, by the way, most adults never dare to take seriously enough. Thorfinn witnessed it by first hand, that hatred and violence affects not just the person it's directed at, but also the person committing it, changing them into someone they may not want to be. Honestly, the best example of that is all the casual racism you see on social media nowadays. In Thorfinn's eyes, it takes a much stronger person to forgive and break the cycle of violence than deciding to engage in it and harm others. At some point in the story, Thorfinn does literally everything to avoid fighting at any cost, and I really mean everything. But then again, it's not all black and white, of course. Yukimura challenges this way of philosophy himself in the story, having Thorfinn in these repeated situations where he has no other option than to literally fight, which makes his fights even more badass as you get the anticipation for them. But honestly, the notion that he is so overly dedicated to not fall into violence is much more interesting in my opinion. So yeah, even though it sounds corny, Thorfinn is one of the most inspirational fictional characters I've ever read. The embrace of self-knowledge, kindness, empathy, humanity, like trying to be a better person. To my understanding, becoming a better person doesn't just mean being nice to others, but to become stronger in every single regard. It's things like having the courage to actually chase our dreams and genuinely try our best, attaining authenticity in our self-knowledge with deep and honest self-assessments, and learning to challenge our own preconceptions about things repeatedly. Like, it's so easy to constantly judge and label others as enemies based off our own limited views and prejudices we learned of some random posts on the internet. For instance, when it comes to political opinions, for example, especially those about how certain groups are treated unfairly. I mean, people just often lash out at others emotionally, just like that. The same goes for religious ideologies, where you can get so caught up in defending things like faith, nation, or values. Things you've been taught are under attack by some invisible force you've only heard about on social media, which then leads to normalized discrimination of groups that never deserve to be your enemies in the first place, you know? Stuff like that really makes me appreciate Vinland Saga even more, as it really has the ability to change someone's mind on things. But my favorite lesson from Yukimura's story is still that people can change and be reborn into someone new by expanding our perspectives, awareness and understanding for the way we think, and developing compassion and kindness to ourselves and other people who we might not have given a chance previously because of something that was taught to us. In my interpretation of what Thorfinn transformation was really about in the end, was just becoming more human. And to be human is perhaps not a fact, but a task. For what it's worth, it's never too late to be whoever you want to be.